Voting used to be a very public act, where depending on where you lived, you had various ways of publicly stating who you were going to vote for. For example, you'd have a small ball, hence the word ballot, or a kernel of corn or something else small that you would place in a candidate's bucket in the town square. It wasn't until the 1800s that most states started moving to what is known as an Australian ballot, where you would cast your vote privately. Voting on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November started circa 1845. Farmers needed enough travel time to make their long trip to the polls, and they certainly couldn't start traveling on the Sabbath over the weekend. Also, the fall harvest is usually over by November, but winter hasn't shut everything down yet. Many states have adopted early voting and voting by mail initiatives, but it makes you wonder why the US still has this antiquated custom. I could and maybe should make a whole list on the Electoral College, but here's a couple facts. The Electoral College was created as a rush compromise made by the framers of the Constitution. They were afraid that voting nationwide would be too big a task. Also, many of the framers didn't trust the common man to make good decisions, and a large part of it was to appease southern slave-owning states who eventually gained a disproportionate amount of electoral power. Just take a look at where most of the early presidents came from. In modern times, people who like the Electoral College say that it gives a voice to small states that would normally not matter at all in a popular election, while critics argue that whoever gets a majority of the vote should become president. What do you think? Here's a list of all the amendments and laws that show the expansion of voting rights throughout US history. I want to take a quick second to highlight the Voting Rights Act of 1965, because despite having the 15th and 19th Amendments, many people of color did not get a chance to vote until this law was passed. Although I just showed you the evolution of voting, like many things in history, voting is much more complex than a list of laws and amendments. Because the Constitution gives the states so much power in voting decisions, there are too many suffrage stories to tell. For example, a woman with property could vote in New Jersey until 1807, and then that right would eventually be taken away. When compared to other developed countries, the voter turnout in the US is one of the worst, with only about 56% of eligible voters actually casting their vote in the 2016 election. Depending on when you're watching this, 2020 is projected to be much higher, but either way, the US has had historically low voter turnout numbers. 2020 election campaign spending has shattered previous records, going upwards of $11 billion. I don't know about y'all, but that makes me sick. Interestingly enough, the research says that the spending doesn't affect the bigger races as much as you would think, but money can strongly affect local and other small-scale races where one candidate is backed by, say, a super PAC and the other is not. Voting by mail actually started out of necessity during the Civil War because so many of the eligible voters were off at war during the election of 1864, one that Lincoln was afraid he was going to lose. Despite many stories about voter fraud, there has been no real evidence that this has been an issue in recent history. President Trump's Election Integrity Committee found no evidence of voter fraud. The FBI director said he had seen no evidence of it, and a report on the 2016 election only highlighted 30 voter fraud incidents out of 23.5 million votes cast. That's about 0.0001%. There's been no evidence of election hacking in the United States, but it's been proven that foreign countries created a massive amount of fake social media accounts that use personal data mined to divide citizens of the United States. Across the world, it seems like Russia has been the most active and successful at this so far. I'm just glad President Trump called him out for it. Puerto Ricans are US citizens, but they can't vote in presidential or congressional elections because of their territorial status. Here's an interactive map that shows political freedom throughout the world. To be honest, I don't really know how accurate it is, but it's definitely sad to see so many places that don't give people a voice in their own livelihoods. What will voting look like in the future? Is it possible to safely vote through the internet or on your smartphone?